Actually, I'm playing for time because I think some folks are walking in. And anyway, it is a summer morning where we're kind of on a summer schedule, and that's okay. Uh, Summer, you do have to kind of kick back a little bit. Can't always be on this, rushing on this kind of schedule. And take your time, Martha. We're all good. Good to see you, Martha. Absolutely. No, I didn't time my lesson out, but I can assure you it's not going to run anywhere near 44 minutes and 50 seconds. So, we've got some time to play with. Uh, so anyway, I think Frank and Meredith will be along in a few minutes. Yeah, yeah. Seems like everybody had something happen this morning, just as they were fixing to leave or on the way or whatever. So anyway, um, we'll go ahead and get started for the benefit of the folks who are watching. And I think when Frank and Meredith come in, they won't be too far behind. They can catch up pretty easily. But if for those of you who have been following along, I've referred to this as the Summer of Proverbs. Basically, this is what we'll be devoting our summer months to. The book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. We were familiar with Proverbs as a book of wisdom, part of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. And of course, there is a lot of wisdom that is in Proverbs, but the amount of wisdom you get out of reading Proverbs or studying it depends on how much you put into it. And so the first several chapters are really an exposition, an essay, or for lack of a better term, a discussion or a lecture from Solomon on wisdom, what it is and why it's valuable. It's more than just kind of a good thing to have. It basically determines the kind of life you're going to have. If you choose to live by God's wisdom, you'll have a totally different outcome as opposed to the person who makes a choice of just following his or her nose and just kind of stumbling through life. We are at chapter 6. For those of you who need to locate where we are here, if you will, turn in your Bibles or your devices, and we're at chapter 6 of Proverbs. Solomon is continuing his discussion of wisdom and some of the basics. Keep in mind that in reality or in the way Solomon imagined this when he was writing or putting together what became the book of Proverbs, he is teaching a class. He's teaching, and essentially he's teaching a class of young men. So some of the advice that you're going to see here looks like it is targeted to young men, especially young men who really need that kind of advice. But we open chapter 6 with some pretty good advice for pretty much anyone, regardless of your stage of life. And basically it is, there's a couple of ways to what is the life that's lived by wisdom. Well, chapter 6 basically says it is a life where you are responsible for yourself. And also you not only work hard, but you put value in what you do in your life's work. And as chapter 6 opens up, Solomon says, "My son," and again, he could either be literally talking to his own son, or he's teaching a class. And the phrase "my son" basically is kind of the standard phrase that a teacher, a rabbi, would use in instructing his class. "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor if you have shaken hands, if you have struck a pledge for a stranger or for another person, you've been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth. What are we talking about here? Well, today we would it's roughly the equivalent of co-signing a note. And some of us have probably done that. Maybe some of us had a relative or a parent who co-signed a note, basically, hey, I'd like to buy a car, or I need to buy, we're moving into our house. We really need furniture. I don't have the money, but I've got to make a down payment. I got to pay for this in some way. Hey, Dad. Hey, Mom. Hey, Uncle. Can you guarantee this loan for me? And that's probably a rather common occurrence, perhaps in some situations, and in most families, that's probably not a problem at all. But of course, the risk of being someone who guarantees someone else's loan in that case is that what happens? Ultimately, you are responsible. And generally, we won't go in and co-sign a note or anything like that unless we have a high degree of confidence that, hey, our son, our daughter, our good buddy here is going to come through with the money and repay the loan. But if not, the whole purpose of being a co-signer is that, hey, if we can't squeeze the blood out of this turnip, we're coming for you. And so you're on the hook for whatever the other person does not pay. So that's the basic concept. But what Solomon is talking about goes a little bit, in fact, it goes considerably further than that. Folks who have agreed here to be another person's source of finance is doing something more than just agreeing to a specific amount. Basically, they've agreed to be or to serve as an open and unending line of credit, past, present, future. No matter what this guy does, no matter what he has done, no matter what he will do. Hey, yeah, I'm good for him. Number one, why would you do that? It seems awfully risky, but basically Solomon says, I don't know why you would do that, but if you have done it, I got some advice for you. Verse 3, do this, my son, to free yourself, since you've fallen into your neighbor's hands. And he says, hey, look, if you ever get yourself into that kind of situation, if you've made this kind of pledge or this kind of promise, you need to get out from under it, because as long as that pledge is good, you are at the mercy of this other person. And he may very well wind up making obligations that you never intended, maybe he never intended. But there's something about, and in fact, some of our politicians have talked about what government policy is about. Basically, it ultimately is spending somebody else's money. There's a lot more freedom in spending somebody else's money than spending your own, especially if perhaps you don't have the money to begin with. But hey, I'm, my friend, my parent, my good buddy, whoever, he'll be good for it. Solomon says if that ain't slavery right there, it's the next best thing. And if you have foolishly agreed to help this person out, you need to get out from under it. He says in verse 3, go to the point of exhaustion, or go and humble yourself and press your plea with your neighbor. Give your neighbor no rest. The original Hebrew is translated as offer yourself to be trodden upon, or throw yourself down at his feet. There's kind of a parallel passage here that comes to mind, and that's the widow and the judge in Luke chapter 18, where the widow basically just hounds the judge to exasperation, and the judge winds up saying, okay, I'll grant the wish just to get you off my back. This is the kind of persistence that Solomon says you need to employ. Get yourself off this financial hook. He says, verse 4, allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. If you have foolishly allowed yourself to be obligated like this, you're kind of like one of those animals that's gotten caught in a trap, and you need to get out from under it and get out of it. So that's advice number 1 in chapter 6. Be responsible for your own debt, not somebody else's. Uh, that way you can focus on what you need to do. And then Solomon discusses the value of hard work. Verse 6, and he goes to a very surprising uh, example here. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in the summer and gathers its food at harvest. I got to tell you, and I'm probably dating myself here because I remember a time when you could go out in the open field and there would be these little ant beds. This was before the day of fire ants, when and other invasive species who've come in and just kind of wiped out or chased off a lot of native critters. But I remember big ants, and they were red ants and black ants. I don't know, Darren, if you still run across those, and you're well, good. They haven't been exterminated yet. But I suppose if you wanted even to study the fire ant, they kind of are the same way. Um, they are they are engineered. I don't know that you can actually say that they have the same kind of brain or reasoning capacity as us or other animals, but they are organized to do certain work. They will, and they are hard at work every day. And they're even with nobody in charge. I mean, there's a queen ant, but the queen's busy back at the hive or in the ant bed. All the other worker ants are out scurrying for food, and it's sometimes we would place little bets like, okay, what's the biggest thing that these ants are going to crawl back into their ant bed? Just in terms of food, because they will do. I mean, they'll do anything. In fact, you'll see the you may see some ants just come together if there's a really big piece of food or whatever. Well, I can't handle this myself. Hey, George, come over here. And George brings Henry and a few other folks. Not that I know the ants' names. But I don't know what ants call each other. But it's interesting to imagine. But they do this with no one in charge. No one has to tell them to work hard. No one has to tell them to gather food. And that's what they're doing in the spring and in the summer and in the fall. Do you ever see ants out in the field during the winter? No. They're inside their ant beds where it's nice and warm. They're protected from the elements. Most important of all, they have food that will last them through that winter until come the spring, and it's time to go forage for food again. Ants are the perfect social organization, according to one biologist. He said, there's no hierarchy. They don't have to elect anyone as president or even as the local mayor or the ant bed or whatever. They just do it all, and they do their work. They do it in an organized fashion. They do it regularly, and they do it on time. And it's that kind of industrious approach that Solomon is pointing to and says, you know what? That's if you want an example from nature to follow, that's the example to follow. No one should have to tell you to go work, let alone work hard. And here he winds up this discussion with with a note of chastisement to the opposite of the hard worker. He says, "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" And what he's talking about here is someone who's not necessarily punching the snooze alarm once or maybe twice. He's talking about someone who just spends basically blows the day. He's burning daylight in bed, snoozing away. Or maybe he's not even asleep, but he sure isn't making any kind of effort to get up. And he's issuing him a warning here. He says, "When will you get up from your sleep?" And then look at verses 10 and 11. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. He's, when he's talking here about a little sleep, a little slumber, he's not talking about just a little sleep. Like I say, it's not basically I'll punch the snooze button, stay in another 10 minutes. He's talking about a little more sleep, a little more slumber, on top of the 14 hours of sleep you already got. Good grief, how much more sleep do you need before you'll start your day? You know, just keep on, and one day you'll wake up, and unlike the ant or the ant bed that spent the spring and summer preparing for the winter, you're going to wake up in the winter of your life or in a winter type situation, and you're not prepared to deal with it. And he says, if that happens, we're talking about poverty here. Yeah, if you don't work, more often than not, you won't eat, or at least you won't eat as abundantly, perhaps, as you'd like to. You'll have scarcity, and basically because you did nothing to earn your living, you did nothing to go out and buy the things that you need, and then eventually to buy the things that you want. And by the time you realize the dire situation you're in, it's already on top of you, and there's very little that you can do, at least by yourself, to take care of it. It'll come suddenly, unexpectedly, like a thief in the night. Not very many thieves send little invitations saying, "I'm going to come by your house later today, maybe Tuesday at 2 o'clock, so I can rob you." No reputable thief would really do that. Usually, when people are robbed, it's something that they come back and discover. Uh, that's how it will happen. That's how these dire straits will result. This little piece of advice is going to be repeated in other areas down the road in Proverbs. So, but if you're okay with marking up your Bible, go ahead and mark it here, because it's Solomon's going to come back to it. And then Solomon spends the next several verses talking about one other outcome of people who are not responsible financially, who are not responsible in terms of taking care of themselves, who don't have a decent job or don't take their job or their work seriously. They got too much time on their hands, and what do they want to do? Oh, let's go out and stir up some trouble. Verse 12. A troublemaker and a villain who goes around with a corrupt mouth. This person is another translation is a worthless person, a wicked man. And here's something that Solomon points out in the next several verses. People who stir up trouble or who engage in troublesome words and troublesome actions, they don't just fall into it. It's not a passive activity. It's something that you do actively. You engage yourself. You engage your entire body to stir up trouble, as you can see in these references to the various parts of the body here. First of all, the troublemaker goes around with a corrupt or a perverse mouth. He winks maliciously with his eye. He signals with his feet, motions with his fingers, who plots evil with deceit in his heart. He always stirs up conflict or dissension. I think probably enough of us, most of us have been around enough times in life. Sooner or later you run into someone like that, who basically, you see them, even if that person's far off, your first thought is, uh-oh, here comes trouble. That person is going to look for something to create a situation about, or see if they can get two or more people going at each other. That uh, don't you know? Absolutely. You know, there is, it's unfortunate, but one of the downsides of social media is that you've seen a whole lot more negativity in our culture. I think because it's just so much easier to stir up because you can go online, and especially if you got a lot of followers, and you know you can say anything, you can write anything, no matter how off off base it is, and you can get a lot of people going. I've seen good friends on social uh, outlets who basically used to be good friends until they got into an online argument, and then suddenly, hey, we're not friends anymore. They're unfriending each other, which is a shame. Solomon says that for such people, trouble is going to trouble them one day. He says, verse 15, therefore disaster will overtake him in an instant. He will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. The implication here is that maybe, you know, it trouble will trouble them. They'll come back upon their heads, one way or the other. Maybe just the way of things, human nature. What goes around comes around in human behavior. But even if that doesn't happen, basically the implication here is God's watching, and if and when He sees fit, He will deal with this person and their behavior. In fact, He has a little saying here, verse 16. He says, "There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to Him." 6 and 7, or maybe it's not always 6 or 7, but you'll notice this kind of style or stylistic saying as we go through Proverbs, where there are 3 things that the Lord hates, 4 that are abomination to Him. And your first thought is, gee, 3, 4? Solomon, make up your mind. Gee, you're messing me up here. Actually, look at it this way. When you see the 6 and 7, it's this it's a standard way of teaching in the Hebrew Old Testament culture of driving a point home. The the 6 things here are are contributing factors to the 7th item that's listed. The 7th item is the condition that results from the 6 factors that are listed. So when Solomon says there are 6 things that the Lord hates, why? Because those 6 things will lead ultimately to a 7th condition that is, the sum is greater than, or something about being the greater than the sum of its parts. Basically, you got some nasty synergy going on here, where the final outcome is much worse than the first 6 things all put together. But what are these 6 things? Well, Solomon lists them, beginning in verse 17. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. You take those haughty eyes, that lying tongue, that violent hand, that and the heart here, of course, not the physical heart necessarily so much as the center of your reasoning powers, your emotions, so forth. Uh, Feet that physically or spiritually are all too quick to go run down the wrong path. And then a lying tongue, basically a false witness. All those are the result and will result in stirring up turmoil, stirring up dissension that doesn't need to be there. Note again how Solomon invokes the various parts of the body. Basically, you are employing your all of your body to do evil. And if you go over, it could be that if you go over to the New Testament, Paul may have had this thought in mind or this verse in mind when he wrote to the Romans in chapter 6, verse 13. And this is a paraphrase here, but basically, Paul warns us not to present the parts of your body as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but as instruments of righteousness to God. God's given you this physical body as well as emotional and intellectual capacities. He's given them to you for a reason. You can use those to do and to carry out His will and to live your life the way He would want you to live it, or you can employ it for evil purposes. It's your choice ultimately, what you choose to do. Now, last week we read a passage and a warning from Solomon about adultery, basically, especially considering the class or the people, the young men that Solomon is addressing. This is perhaps very, very important information. It's something that they really, really need to consider at this phase in their lives when basically you're just, as a young man, you're programmed toward that direction. Solomon says, you really need to be careful here. And as he continues in verse 20, he says, my son, keep your father's command. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will keep you or watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. Things that we're taught by our parents, by our spiritual advisors, the stuff that we study when we do Bible study, they're more than just good ideas. They're the things that have the power of life and death over us. They can lead to either the kind of outcome, the kind of life that God wants, or they can lead to ultimately a very unhappy outcome. But these are something that's good for something more than just Sunday morning, Wednesday evening, whatever, once a week, once a month. No, how about every day and continually? When you're not reading them, keep them in the back of your head. This is all good stuff, and God's given it to us for a reason. Solomon says, these commands, verse 23, these commands are a lamp. This teaching is a light for correction and instruction, the way to life, keeping you from the immoral woman, from the smooth talk of a wayward wife. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. Coveting. And you can covet more than just any kind of someone's sexual attractiveness. Coveting, as we've seen in the law of Moses, can extend to a lot of things, almost every and anything. But coveting begins with eye contact. Solomon's reminding us. We look at something and we like it. Maybe we fall in love with it, or we think we're in love with it. Basically, it may be more like lust. Gotta have it. We just gotta have it. I am not going to be able to breathe tomorrow's air if I don't get this one thing and make it part of my life. Begins with the eye and leads to the mind, but especially in a situation here that has to do with sexual temptation. Solomon says, avoid it. Don't lust in your heart after beauty. Don't let someone's eyes, the way they look at you, the physical attractiveness captivate you. He says a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Let's make sure and we understand what Solomon's saying here. This is not a ringing endorsement of prostitution. Okay, that's not the intent here, and this should not be. Please don't use this as a proof text, or if someone uses it on you, saying, "Hey, wait a minute, hold off here." But you know, uh, gee, e- e- having that kind of relationship and equating it to the price of a loaf of bread. And I know inflation being what it is, what's a loaf of bread now? $9. It's it ain't what it used to be, but hey, still we're talking about y- you know when you pursue that kind of relationship that in that manner, uh, you're cheapening that action, that activity. That's what illicit sex will do. It cheapens and harms relationships. Not only makes it something that God never intended it, but it can create all sorts of problems on the other end, especially if you're dealing with another person's spouse. Mm. Can a man scoop fire in his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. Hey, you're playing with fire, buddy, and you'll get burned. No one who touches her will go unpunished. And he continues, men don't despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his hunger, if he's starving. Yet if he's caught, he must pay sevenfold, though it cost him all the wealth of his house. And look at how Solomon's setting up this scenario here. Hey, there's thievery in life, in our lives. It's just that's part of our broken system here. People will steal. But the man who steals because he's fixing to starve to death, people can understand that. And even if that person is caught and says you need to pay that back and put something a little bit extra on it, you know, back in the day that was the remedy for dealing with theft for a loaf of bread. But Solomon continues, a man who commits adultery has no sense. He lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot. His shame will never be wiped away. For jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he will show no mercy when he takes revenge. He will not accept any compensation. He will refuse the bribe, however great it is. What's the point he's making here? Hey, if you steal a loaf of bread, you can pay that back. You can restore the loaf of bread. And if you did it because you needed to feed yourself or feed some hungry children, people will understand that. You'll actually have people sympathizing with you on your side. Adultery is theft too, Solomon is saying. You're stealing something. You're stealing that special relationship between a husband and wife. You're appropriating it for your own personal use, something that you have no right to. You can replace a loaf of bread. How do you replace a stolen relationship like that? It ain't easy to do if it can be done at all. And you have the additional complication of the upset husband who if he's angry enough just will not be mollified no matter what you try to do or what kind of words or accommodation you want to make him. There are all sorts of stories that we've heard about lovers quarrels, basically someone caught with someone else's wife and they wind up getting shot or whatever. I guess it does. I mean, I can see how that happens if the third party is angry enough, they're going to do something about it, and maybe there is something to temporary insanity where you just kind of lose it if you're angry, if you're hurt enough. Not I. That discussion is not an endorsement of that kind of behavior. It's basically like, why would you even want to go there and risk that kind of trouble because it could literally lead to a very unhappy outcome. So, and he continues this warning as we go into chapter 7. He says, my son, keep my words, store up my commands within you, keep my commands, and you will live. No fooling. Guard my teachings as the apple of your eye. apple here, basically, that's one of those Hebrew metaphors. Basically, the apple of your eye basically is the pupil. Basically, and the thought is, hey, that's very important because if you can see another person's pupil, you can see into their heads, see into their souls. Apple of your eye, very important part of your body, especially if you're trying to build another relationship with someone else. But keep my commands, guard my teachings, bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Yeah, we just heard that, Solomon, but maybe he's repetition here is to make a point. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and to insight, you are my relative. You are my closest relative, my kinsman. They will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. And here Solomon closes out the chapter with a little story. Not sure whether it's true or not. Maybe names have been changed to protect the innocent, that kind of thing. Maybe it's just kind of, it could be an actual event. It could be kind of a, hey, I've seen this happen too many times. And it's a composite of some sad situations we've seen here. Solomon closes out with a story. In verse 6, he says, at the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice, and I saw among the simple, that is simple as in simple-minded, I noticed among the young men a youth who lacked judgment. Now, the implication here is, hey, at a certain, we've talked a little bit earlier about those of us who gained wisdom along our experience along the way. We talk about our earlier days when we were young and stupid. There's there's a general assumption that at a certain age you just don't have, you don't have the wisdom that other people do. And that's not necessarily a mark against you. That's just the nature of being young. You don't know any better. But even among those, there are folks who basically maybe are a little bit more challenged, or especially challenged in the smart department. And this Solomon picks out someone here. He says this is a young, simple-minded man who had absolutely no sense. He lacked judgment, depending on how your translation reads. He was devoid of understanding. He's physically he's an adult. He's full grown. He's probably he got the head smarts. He's confident about who he is, what he thinks he is, and how the world works and so forth. He just doesn't have the experience or the wisdom to put everything together, to think properly. Anyway, this young man, verse 8, was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. This man is just happening to be strolling down toward this particular woman's house. The way it reads here, the implied thought is he's walking down there accidentally on purpose. How often do we stumble into a sinful situation? Not because it just drops in on us unannounced, but we kind of play around the edges. Yeah, I really want to see what that's like. And before you know it, you're drawn in. Maybe this is what's happening. But anyway, he's walking down the street near this house, and then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She just happens to come out, and she just happens to be somewhat provocative in nature. And note how Solomon discusses her in the next couple of verses. She is unruly. She's loud and defiant. Her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. Kind of reminds you of that old song, I was looking for love in all the wrong places, something like that, you know. And she's taking it outside the house, contrary to what God would want. Anyway, she sees this young man, verse 13. She took hold of him and kissed him. And we're not talking about a peck on the cheek, apparently, but this is, just really laying it on him. And with a brazen face, she said, and she mentions 4 things. Today I've fulfilled my vows, and I have food from my fellowship offering at home. Hey, I am a good person, and I've done all the right things, at least religiously. There's no problem there religiously. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you, and I found you. Hey, babe, you're the one I want. You're the one I've been waiting for. Gee, it's appealing to the young man's ego, just really buttering him up. For a third thing, I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. Back in the day, back in that culture, if you had colored linens from Egypt, you were you were among the rich and wealthy. That was because those were quite expensive and quite beautiful. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. It'll be great. It'll be a mind-blowing experience. It'll be everything you've ever imagined and more. And even better, verse 19, here's the kicker. My husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and won't be home till full moon. That could be 4 weeks from now. And if there's a storm and the clouds are covered up, who knows when he's coming back? Point is, hey, I'm good. I'm good with God. I'm even good with God if you're worried about religious elements. Babe, you're the one I've wanted all my life. I've been waiting for you. It's going to be a great experience, and it'll be our secret. No one will ever know. No one will ever find out. We won't be discovered. Verse 21, with persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once, he followed her. He didn't say anything like, well, gee, sounds interesting. Hey, can I get back to you? It just probably didn't even stop to think about it. He just basically let her take him by the hand and lead him along. So all at once, he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, like an animal going into a trap that it's not even aware has been set. A deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces its liver. Ouch. They talk more about the liver in the Old Testament about physical injury and so forth. But if your liver's shot, you're in trouble here, buddy. Like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. This guy just basically is letting the moment carry him in. He really has given no thought about what's going to happen in the morning, let alone next week, let alone next year. Never a consideration of, gee, what if her husband does find out? Am I going to be in trouble? Along with all sorts of other situations and problems and issues that he hasn't even begun to think about. But that young man is setting himself up for failure, probably even physical death. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Again, adultery, sexual immorality, along with so many other forms of sin, they all begin in the heart, in the mind, and then your actions follow. You plant the seed in your head, and then if you continue to nurse it and nurture it and think about it, it becomes a bigger and bigger deal, and eventually your actions follow. Many are the victims this immoral woman has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave. Her house is the way to hell, reads one translation, leading down to the chambers of death. So, food for thought. Think twice before if you're confronted in a situation like that. And if you keep finding yourselves confronted with situations like that, by implication, you need to ask yourself, what kind of path, why are you always in that situation? So that closes our lesson. We're at the end of chapter 7. We have one more session where we have we'll study the opening prologue of wisdom and what it's about and why it's important. So if you will, if you want to read ahead, please read chapters 8 and 9 of the book of Proverbs. That'll be our lesson for next Sunday. And I hope you all have a great week. And Lord willing, we'll see you all next Sunday. And for those of you online, I think we actually will see you, or you will see us, because the TV should be back. It should be back from its weekend off. So have a great week, everyone.